Thank you, Jason. Good morning. Some of you know this, but where I did my flight training is also where I grew up in Ellensburg, Washington, a small town located in central Washington. Anyone who has ever been there, I think, would agree it truly is the Windy City. While with ExpressJet in 2009, I transferred to Chicago, and I felt as though my training well prepared me for this Windy City. It didn't take long to realize it's really not that windy at all, and that it actually got its name from politicians filled with hot air and empty promises. 2 years ago, this group of officers stood on a stage similar to this one and made our campaign speeches. I am proud to report that we have followed through on nearly all of those promises in these 2 short years. We explained our vision and our potential roles at the national level, and you trusted us with your vote. I hope our remarks today will highlight how this entire national officer team has worked to show that we are worthy of your continuing trust. As our association continues to grow and thrive, we had outgrown some of the restrictions, limitations, and rules in place. We promised to evaluate our processes and update where appropriate. It had already been started in some ways with the creation of the Structure, Services, and Financial Review Committee, or SAFER. For example, the contract implementation grants many of our pilot groups have received from the MCF were already being studied. Along with the committee members and the ALPA staff and the finance department, we've continued that work and we've ramped it up. Our overarching goal is simple: to make it easier for you, our hardworking ALPA pilot representatives, to do the jobs you've been entrusted to do by your members. So before I bore you with the financial numbers and what I like to call death by PowerPoint, I wanted to brief you on some of the accomplishments and the new goals moving forward. A few weeks ago, I was asked to brief my MEC on some of the national changes, and the list was well over 40 items. There's not enough time to cover them all here, but here are some of the most impactful. First on the list, of course, is the first of its kind, across the board, offer to return dues accomplished earlier this year. We've also been able to update our policies so our LECs can spend their budget on flight pay loss and family awareness events, helping you provide more for your pilots. We updated our spending and reimbursement policies so they match today's costs, and we created language that will allow for future growth by tying them to the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. We instituted more changes to the MCF, which, as you'll see later, continues to be healthy and growing. This allows your pilot groups to access some of the grant money via matching funds when in mediation, not having to wait until their budgets are expended. For your pilots, we updated our capabilities to allow for additional electronic payment options for outstanding dues obligations, something that had been requested for many years. Lastly, we put language in place that provides benchmarks that, if met, would bring future offers to return dues. The Executive Council can only overturn this process for good reason. This week, we have 2 recommendations that we are asking you to vote on. The first one has been a topic of conversation for quite a while: whether distributions of access retirement contributions returned to pilots because of government-imposed compensation limits should be considered duesable income. Ultimately, pilot groups should be striving to achieve other retirement funding vehicles in their CBAs. But in the meantime, the SAFER Committee recommends that funds originally earmarked for retirement should be exempt from dues. And second is primarily administrative change, a recommendation to update the language in the Constitution and bylaws that governs any offered return of funds from the MCF. This amendment is to comply with Department of Labor rules and aligns with our current practice. However, our work continues. Going forward, the SAFER Committee has taken a close look at the Operating Contingency Fund, or OCF. Much like the MCF, its balance continues to grow. We plan to look at additional ways to use this fund to assist our pilot groups. We want a healthy reserve without creating an excessive one. And finally, the offer to return dues policy created basically what we call a variable dues rate for the time being. but we're still exploring a potential future dues rate reduction. The emphasis, though, has to be on finding a path forward that establishes a fair implementation plan across the entire association, one that appropriately directs funds to MECs and LECs. As you can imagine, this will take time and has to be done methodically and correctly, as it touches nearly every account within the association. None of this is possible, of course, without sound strategic funding. As I remarked 2 years ago in this meeting, almost all decisions boil down to funding and finances. Much of what we're able to accomplish can be attributed to ALPA's tremendous growth over the past decade. Since 2014, when JetBlue joined ALPA, we've seen growth in both the number of pilot groups we represent, as you see here, and the number of our pilots, as you see here, hopefully. Love technology, right? That growth is also reflected in our finances. We just talked about this, the OCF and its growth over 10 years. It's grown from under $10 million to $65.7 million. And our MCF, which we also spoke about earlier, even with additional uses approved for this fund, still has a balance of $138.5 million when just 10 short years ago, it was just $43 million. Here you can see a straight numbers comparison, 2014 and today, for the cumulative balance held by our MECs, our MCF, and OCF balance, ALPA's average monthly cash balance, and the Kitty Hawk balance. As you can tell, there have been enormous gains in all of those accounts. Next, we look at ALPA now, how we have fared financially last year, our status this year, and our budget next year. As you see here, the association finished last year with a net surplus of more than $115 million. This was, as we've reported in announcing the offer to return dues, primarily driven by new contracts for many of our pilot groups, as well as an increasing revenue throughout the industry. That financial success is continuing this year. Through August 31st, our year-to-date net surplus is $92.5 million, with $240 million in dues collected. That puts our current surplus $35.3 million ahead of last year's total at the same time. Here we see the budget and actual numbers year-to-date for the administrative and support, or A&S account. While we do budget conservatively at ALPA, these numbers are above our optimistic expectations. And as voted on at our last executive board, any surplus greater than $10 million in this A&S account will trigger an offer to return dues. This chart shows you the last 5 years of ALPA finances. The blue bar is our budgeted dues, with the orange bar our actual dues. And for expenses, gray is our budgeted expenses, and yellow our actual expenses. Even through COVID, our actual dues have come in higher than budgeted, sometimes significantly, and continue to grow. Our 8-month total for the 2024 year-to-date, as you see, is actually higher than any full-year budgeted total in ALPA history. Yet, another example of ALPA's growth over the past decade. Now we turn to next year. Here you see the 2025 budget approved by the Executive Council and the Executive Board. The total budgeted dues income is $337.8 million, a 10% increase over the 2024 dues budget and a continuing sign of the strength of our new contracts and the post-COVID rebound of the industry. The pie chart you see here is broken up according to the percentages in our administrative manual, with the amounts on the right taken off the top before the remaining total is divided amongst the MECs, LECs, administrative support count, and the OCF. The budget also includes a strategic reserve, with $35 million set aside to return to our members as a part of a projected offer to return dues, and $4.9 million to the headquarters building fund. And speaking of the headquarters building fund, you see our progress here. A bit of background for those of you unfamiliar with the purpose of these funds. In 2019, we moved from our headquarters in Herndon, Virginia, into our current location of Vallow Park in Tyson's Corner. We recently tore down the Herndon building headquarters and are in the process of selling the land. We signed a lease to 2031 in Vallow Park, and we're closing in on halfway through that lease. ALPA created this fund and related headquarters building committee to ensure that all options are available to the association when our Vallow lease expires. I want to reiterate, though, that no decisions have been made and no current plans are in place, but we are still in our exploratory mode. At year end, as you see, the fund balance will be $15 million with another $4.9 million budgeted for next year. The committee meets regularly and have looked at a few buildings to keep our collective pulse on the real estate. There's still a long way to go before our release at Vallow Park is up, but when the time comes to make a decision, we'll have all the options available to us on the table. ALPA has come a long way in the past decade. Even with a worldwide pandemic, we've continued our growth. With that growth, we've been able to offer more to our members, and we continue to update the association's practices so it better works for our members. That, at the most basic, is why we're all here, for our members, and to leave it better than when we found it. I'm proud to work for every single one of our 78,000 plus members and will continue to do my best to live up to the trust given by you to me when elected. When I was campaigning 2 years ago, I wrote down my campaign promises and goals on a little sheet of paper as a quick reference for when I was briefing your various carriers. I keep that sheet pinned up in my office as both a reminder and a roadmap. Hopefully, at the conclusion of this meeting, I can take that sheet of paper down and place a great big check mark on it. Lastly, I want to add that many of the changes we've implemented came from our experiences as MEC members, officers, committee members, etc., and where we felt there needed to be change. Please don't hesitate to reach out at any time if you find an issue with any financial policies. As great as this association is, I believe working together, we can make it even better. I look forward to working with all of you and with those others of us here on the stage to do just that. Thank you.